Hi, my name is Julie Fowble. Welcome to my final analysis of my website. As far as educational usefulness, this was originally geared towards corporate management being the audience, with a very low knowledge of what types of corporate learning are available to them. Typically, I predicted their age would be baby boomers, Generation X, and possibly a small group of traditionalists. I had believed that this site would help give them some basic knowledge on how they can save resources as well as money, and give their employees new opportunities to learn using their preferred style. What I learned is my original intentions changed as I began. Walking through the documentation that we created in order to support our creation of our website, if you'll follow with me, and we go through here and we look at our graphic organizer, this is where I originally began. What I found was I'm my own worst enemy. So I had this big thought in my head and eventually wound up narrowing it down to something very basic and simple and totally redoing my website. But my original intent was to look at corporate learning and development, compare classroom learning to online learning, define it through it being instructor-led versus computer-based, give you similar features, differential features, cost analysis, and basically at the end do a comparison analysis with a conclusion. So that's where I began. Where I ended, notice we have classroom learning versus online learning. Where I ended was here. Corporate learning strategies, traditional, technical, or both. So why did I choose this particular color scheme? Having a background in advertising and branding, what I found is blue tends to be a color that is neutral to both male and female, both genders. I like the brown at the top because it's kind of calming, but yet at the same time, using the green, to me green represents growth. Spring, newness, which some of these concepts are new. So, and this does again revolve around growth. Something along these lines, what I have figured out as I've gone, is not only does this apply to corporate learning strategies, but this applies to education in general. So, why did I organize it the way I did? My goal was to make this as simple as possible because of the way I've started with such a big, broad idea and narrowed it down. I didn't want it to be too overly complicated. So my whole goal was to have a very basic front page that had a couple of pictures that kind of represented what we were trying to communicate. At the very top, the links, I didn't want to overwhelm them immediately, so I gave them a home page and an introduction. And on the home page, I wanted to communicate specifically that it was not my intent to sway them one way or the other as to what learning style was going to be best for their environment. I also wanted to immediately let them know that this is going to be an interactive site, which is why you see the italics down here with my first interactive activity. Now, once they had gone through the home, they moved to the introduction. Immediately, I felt like placing this picture up here spoke to the cause of why they would even be on my website. What are their options? Why are they here? Well, what is it that we can do to, when it comes to learning, to get the end user to absorb the knowledge that we need to absorb in a timely and more economic manner. So as I mentioned in here, what is your return on investment, and what kind of bang are you getting for your buck? And that's kind of what the picture symbolizes. So once we have given them just these basic two things, then we list more. Okay, well, what is more? More is traditional corporate learning, online learning, and blended learning. So you can see from my original map that I moved away from traditional classroom instruction versus online training or computer-based training to a combination of all three: traditional corporate learning, online learning, and blended learning. And you can see as I go through every page here, there's a picture that's supposed to represent what it is that we're explaining. I kept it as simple as possible. A short definition, a few characteristics, and I felt like rather than giving them a whole bunch of words, a video would be the best way for it to be a little more interactive and show an actual example of what's going on. What did I learn? My biggest challenge is myself. I have great big ideas and I need to learn to narrow them down and then start to broaden them out. So when it came to interactivity, my first goal, as some of you probably read, was to create an app for my Android phone. It was quite the challenge. I'm not saying that it's something I'm not going to do. It is something that I'm going to use in the future because I believe it's going to be beneficial for my company. However, the interactivity is really important. It's what gets the learner engaged in the website. And I think the most important thing that I've learned is that every resource we've used in this course is something that not only applies to education, online learning, but it can apply to organizational dynamics. So a lot of the things that I've used or that I have explored are definitely things that I'm going to use going forward. So when it comes to, giving high-level presentations to executives, to the chief of our nation, etc., I want to find new and creative ways to do it other than just a basic, business plan. And what I've learned is through these tools, I have other options. It's not just geared towards learning, it's geared towards presentations. So what do I feel could have been improved? I think the content of the website could have been more thorough. Going back to the home page, I think as far as improving the website, my analysis is that connecting my interactive activities a little more closely together would have been more beneficial. I have my wiki spaces, which I absolutely love, and I'm using in my job with strategic planning now to get certain feedback. But it took going all the way down to, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th page of Test Your Knowledge to get to your second online activity. I felt like if I would have had more time, I could have greatly improved this activity. I'm not happy with the way it looked. The other thing I think could have been improved is as you go through the different pages, it seems to be pretty consistent. However, my biggest challenge was being able to see the font, making sure that everything was consistent as far as, the type was concerned, where the videos were placed. And I'll give you a great example. If you go to your feedback, I like having this page on here, and if I had more time, I probably would have deleted it. However, notice it's got a whole different look than my first pages or actually the entire website. And there's no photo on here. There's no thank you for your participation. I would have added something along those lines. So, the most helpful part of this whole class for me was looking at, well, actually creating my graphic organizer, deciding who my audience was going to be, the sitemap, the style guide, creating it, and then going back and revising it. It was a process that had to continuously be changed. It's almost like program management, like being a program manager. So, and then lastly, the most beneficial thing to me was exploring the different interactive features that we have available to us. I found some new resources I was able to implement. I was able to share with my team and people in our human resources department. The biggest eye-opener for me was the usability test. You know, you have this picture of what your website is going to look like in your mind. And from where I started to where I ended up as we go through each of these pages, there is a huge difference. Huge difference. This is not at all what my original brainstorming was about. But this is where it ended up. Overall, am I happy with it? I'm okay with it. But it definitely could have been improved. I think a little more information could have been shared, but for your very basic user that doesn't know anything about this, with it being interactive, having the wiki, giving suggestions, and almost kind of like a networking opportunity to share resources, I think is satisfactory. But again, the usability test was a real eye-opener for me. Lastly, as I close, what I want to do is I want to say thank you to everybody who was in this class, specifically because everybody had such great ideas. And I hope that you don't mind, but a lot of your ideas are things that I'm going to use in the future when it comes to organizational dynamics, development, strategic planning, and strategic programs. There were some, you know, from human resources standpoint to a technology standpoint, to see everybody's different ideas implemented. And hats off to you that are, you know, I can't remember who it was who had the site about, and I apologize, about being so passionate about literature. I think that's wonderful. I had the opportunity today to go by a book fair at the school and purchase every book on the list that every teacher had put out. And also buy books for those who were a little more disadvantaged, maybe poverty level, or couldn't afford to go to the book fair, and set up a program where we could find a way for those kids to get books. Your site had meaning to it. It wasn't just, you know, okay, here's the knowledge, now you decide what you're going to do with it. So I enjoyed seeing the passion that you all put into your sites. It was very obvious that you guys truly cared about what it was that you did, and the way that you incorporated that into your websites is something that I feel like I'm lacking, and I am a very black and white person, so I'm working on it, and hopefully we'll get there eventually. So thank you for the experience. I hope to follow your sites and see what you're able to do with it. I know some of you will continue to use your sites, so I am greatly looking forward to that. And thank you to Dr. Thompson for all the additional resources.